Good evening. Welcome to Backstory with Joan Goldstein. I'm Joan Goldstein. The topic for this evening is energy and the environment. How timely can that be? My guest this evening is Steve Hiltner, who is on the Princeton Environmental Commission and someone who has important and interesting things to share with us. Let's start first with the big picture, you might say, the international or national picture. The offshore oil, the oil spill that's happened with the Deepwater Horizon, and how we've watched and watched now for what, almost 2 months, since April 20th, and wonder when it's going to end and if it's going to end, and what is it that we're doing to ourselves and to our environment. Way back in 1982, I wrote a book called The Politics of Offshore Oil. And that shows you that in the 1980s, when all of these problems actually begin to happen, begin to show up, although there have been on and off oil spills before that time, but the real problems start after the 1980s, and there's a reason for why that's happened. I'm happy to say that I'm going to reissue this book and update it as well fairly soon. Okay, we have an oil spill going on since April 20th. People are angry, people are blaming each other. Some people say it's the administration, some people say it's the oil industry. Most people don't take credit for it themselves. When I asked a group of students in my college what they felt about their responsibility or their connection to it, they wrote some really interesting comments. One fellow, who I shall say is called Dave, wrote, "Today I believe that we are not a society anymore, but work more individually. All also have learned to blame and hold other people responsible, but not think that we are united, can overcome the problem." So if you take the oil spill situation, instead of we taking the responsibility and see that it doesn't happen, we start to blame others. So he's talking about the blame problem. But when he gets to the end, he says, there is no update on the problem and it's been overlooked. People start to live their lives like nothing ever happened. The whole point is we need to work united as a society to save time, money, and other factors, and not as an individual. What do you think about this, Steve? How does that resonate with you?
Well, I think we do work as individuals in terms of what our impact is. I think it's all well and good to blame BP for their obvious incompetence and their failure to take adequate precautions. And the government obviously did not regulate adequately, and it's when I heard about the spill, I thought they were going to close it off and it wouldn't be too awful a thing. But so it's astounding to see that there's a real lack of ability to control this sort of thing, both in the private sector and the public sector. But I don't think it's enough to just say, well, the BP's at a fault and the government didn't do its job. It's, there's been talk about preparing a plan in case the crude oil makes it up along the East Coast to New Jersey. Which I guess is fine, but what we really need to be talking about is how we create the demand that forces, that motivates these oil companies to take these risks, to dig deeper and deeper into the earth to get the oil we feel that we need. It's, we have to look at ourselves and our individual impact and how that affects the collective impact of everybody. So I see the individual as being quite powerful, to the degree that we can change our lives and take some lessons from this awful tragedy.
That's a very American point of view, isn't it? A very enlightened point of view that we have a role and responsibility and that we can do something. I think the can do is something that people raise voices about. One interesting paper that came through was from a young woman who comes from Korea. And again, every time you turn around, you hear about another spill that you didn't know about. And she wrote, I am sorry I do not know about the oil spill problems in the U.S. However, my country, Korea, had experienced an oil spill. One of the big ships had spilled and into the sea and stained the water with black color. Many citizens gathered around the seashore and watched. After a month later, the sea was more clear than before. The citizens did not volunteer to clean the seashore. The sea could not clean quickly. So this is a rather, quick piece of, well, happened in Korea. She was there, she saw it. There's Nigeria. There was an interesting article in the New York Times about 50 years there's been oil spills continuing in Nigeria in the River Niger. Wasn't that the river that Langston Hughes wrote the poem about? I've seen rivers wide, and this is the Niger River. 50 years this has been going on, and they still haven't been able to stop it. So if you start looking around the world, you realize that this problem exists. And that, again, asks the question, well, can we do it any better? Can we stop it from happening? And again, what is, how can we make it get better? How do we make it go away?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think change happens in two steps. One is for people to realize just how unethical it is for us to be using fossil fuels. And there's three ways that it's unethical, and there may be more. But the first one is that we are using a natural resource that is not renewable. And over the next, this several hundred years we have here of using coal and oil, natural gas, we're going to use it up. And then people who come after us are not going to have this wonderful energy source. And it is a fantastic energy source. The amount of energy you have in a gallon of gasoline is just phenomenal, and it's so convenient. And we are saying, essentially, by just using so much of it ourselves, that future generations will not be able to enjoy the benefits of it. So that's one level, is that we are taking for ourselves this one-time gift from geologic history. And of course, the oil spill shows, another way in which it's unethical, in that all the pollution in Nigeria, in Ecuador, it's ongoing spilling of oil. In the process of drilling for it and transporting it to our gas stations, there's this whole, it leaves this trail of pollution, which is very detrimental and is hard to restore the places that it's ruined. And then the third, of course, is climate change. And of course, by taking this fossil fuel, which is actually benefiting us greatly by being underground. I mean, it's underground because we have such a fine climate, because all that carbon is underground. It's stored safely down there. We're pulling it up. We're burning it. We're releasing all this carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide, of course, we can't see it. We can't smell it. Can't feel it. But it's a very potent chemical when it gets into the atmosphere, and it causes the greenhouse effect. So when we release it in the atmosphere, it's not going to go away. It's going to stay there for thousands of years. This is not some kind of bit of pollution that you can clean up and a year later everything's fine. It's going to be there for 1,000 or more years. It lingers in the atmosphere. So the impact we're having is going to last and last and last. And I think once people realize that, then they realize that they are part of essentially an unethical regime for an unethical lifestyle. And of course, we cannot divorce ourselves completely from it. I mean, but we all use this energy, and it's a wonderful thing, but we have to realize the impacts, the multiple impacts it has, and try to separate, remove ourselves as much from the consumption aspect. And I would say in that aspect, the consumption, again, we are just like we aren't aware of all these oil spills in Ecuador or Nigeria, we're also not aware of our consumption of fossil fuel, and that our homes don't have any meters that we can read. If you turn on the air conditioning, there's no big number that is broadcast on the wall saying we're suddenly using 3,500 more watts of energy than we were before we flicked the switch. And so that's all hidden. Our machines are designed to be as quiet as possible. And so we really don't notice our consumption. So the next step, once you realize that it's just not right for us to be using all this energy, the next step is to figure out, to get in touch with one's consumption of it and see where one's using it and how much and what one can do to start reducing the use of it.
It's very interesting. When I reread my book, which came out in 1982, it was published by Praeger, at the end, this is the beginning of the 1980s, and a lot of things happened in the 1980s. There was a change in philosophy about the role of government as regulator. And in many cases, in many sectors, the government was kind of pushed back or defanged in their role as regulators. Well, it happened as well with the problem of offshore oil, because we had, began in the late 70s. They were saying, we've got to do something about it. We can't keep using these fossil fuels. Mostly we can't keep buying this from overseas, from countries that are politically volatile, and therefore can cause problems for us because of their ability to withhold. There was an embargo, an oil embargo, and after it was over, they raised the price of oil enormously, and that affected the entire economy. So you get a little bit coming from President Ford. And then Jimmy Carter comes into office, and he starts to say, okay, we're going to work on this problem. And he formed a lot of advisory committees. I served on one of them, on offshore oil and gas leasing. And mainly he was looking for ideas to figure out how we could get more energy resources. Well, what happened then when Reagan became president is he took hands off on regulations. They called it streamlining. They said, let's streamline the process. Well, let's not spend so much time with these environmental impact statements, worrying about whether or not they can be an accident or it can cause an accident. And they streamlined the process, which meant they overlooked perhaps some of the more cautionary activities that might have been helpful. So what we're getting today is kind of the fallout from the 1980s, where government began to have lost their power, their independence too, and their power. How do we know about independence? Because we had a legislator from Texas who made a statement, which he was later to regret, that he felt that the president of the U.S. was picking on BP oil by demanding restitution from them. He later had to retract that, but it exposed the underbelly of just where people's loyalties lay. And it was not really in the best interest, perhaps, of the populace, but in the best interest of those who supported their political careers. So it kind of starts in the 1980s, and we're living with the legacy of the 1980s now. And when you discover that the Bureau of Mines was lax. It was sitting around, watching pornography, whatever it was they were doing that was not part of their job description. You have to understand that it comes from a message they receive, which is, we don't interfere. We exist, but we don't interfere.
Right.
Kind of like that TV show that I enjoy watching for perverse reasons, The Office, where the guy who is the boss does as little as possible, and it seems to me that the reason I watch it and laugh is because I've seen enough of it in real life. So that's another element in it. While we had a system in place that said the government could be in a separate entity, that government could be the kind of monitor over how a big industry operated without And by taking away their power, we took away the restraints. And that's why so many things came right from the 1980s on. So how do we see, and I don't know if you want to look at that or discuss that, but how do we see government taking a role that would help?
Well, I've watched the. I'm really puzzled by the whole anti-government movement. I guess anyone who loves sports understands that you have to have lines around a tennis court. You know, you have to have boundaries. You have to have line judges. You have to have umpires in any sport. And you know, there's boundaries around a football field. It's all part of the game. And in you know, you can talk about the free market, but you have that wonderful energy of entrepreneurship, of motivation to succeed, that one naturally wants to harness. But at the same time, and that's true in sports. You know, we want to see this tremendous output of activity and competition. But at the same time, naturally, you need to have regulation of it, or it all falls apart. I mean, you can't enjoy a game where there's no rules. So I don't understand the idea that government is bad, you have to keep it out of the marketplace, because it's just, they're complementary, I should think. And I think a lot of businesses would say the same. Now, you can have too much regulation and stifle the marketplace, or you can have too little, and obviously that leads to these disasters that we've had. BP, the financial meltdown, you know, all of this is a lack of intelligent regulation. So I think it's always a matter of degree, but to argue that government is naturally bad is a complete falsehood, and doesn't really contribute to making the world better. And also, I think anti-government sensibility is also really makes it hard to feel good about one's country if one thinks the government is an awful thing. That's how we come together. That's what the founding fathers created to make our country is a government, and so that's really at the core of who we are. And if we don't like it, then maybe we don't like who we are in some respect. So now I think I'm as skeptical of government as anyone. I mean, I think liberals, conservatives, they all have a bone to pick with government, different aspects of it. They think it's overbearing in different ways. But I think the cure for that actually is for citizens to get involved with government. It doesn't take care of itself. Democracy doesn't take care of itself. It needs us to be a part of it and to contribute. And I was to a conference recently. I believe it's called Citizens. Well, I have my notes here. Let's see. But I wanted to get this right because it's a wonderful movement in New Jersey, the Citizens Campaign, led by Harry Pozicki and Tom Byrne.
Tom Byrne, okay.
Yeah.
It's Brendan Byrne's son, right?
Jointhecampaign.org.
Right.
They have this whole website. And I went to this conference of theirs, June 9th, in New Brunswick. And there were 1,400 people there. It's a big movement, and the movement is to get people involved with their local government. And you know, there's so many people upset about the property taxes and different kinds of taxes, and you know, there are problems with government running well. But the way you make it run well is you start getting involved and you figure out how to make it run better, because the representatives can't do it all, and there needs to be some kind of citizen input. And locally, there's the Citizens Financial Advisory Task Force for the borough, which is a group of citizens that's come together to look at the books of the Princeton Borough. and try to make sense of it and make some recommendations to the staff and the Borough Council on things like negotiations of contracts and ways to save money, make the government more efficient. So I think one has to accept that the government is an important entity in our lives, and it's up to us to make it work as well as possible, and hopefully reduce taxes in that way.
That's a really important point. I mean, going back to the founding of the country, it was a rule of law. The rule of law meant that the government had to enforce the law. Who else could do it? And when we try to make them the bad guy, what we're doing is dismantling the democracy, the very democracy that we treasure, that we feel good about. And then the role of citizens. You know, I looked here at some of the comments made by the students. Did they think they had any role, any power? And they said, well, they're searching for it. They're not sure. They said they'd like to be of help. They're not really sure how they could be of help. So there is this, perhaps we're going into a new era where citizens once again say, you know, unless I get involved, then the country is not going to be as balanced in its treatment or its role as it should be. So there are all these young people out there who haven't lived through the 60s and the 70s and these eras of great social involvement. What's possible for them today? I mean, I like some of the suggestions you're making about getting involved with local government. A lot of people write local government off as just, well, they're sitting around our table talking, but they're not really doing anything. I mean, that's not your experience, is it, Steve? Or it's not what you believe should be happening?
Well, my activism, I guess, I've never thought of myself as an activist. I kind of work behind the scenes mostly, and I'm not out there demonstrating, really. I guess I feel as an individual that I have a lot of power to change things. We have a house, and it uses energy, and if I can reduce the amount of energy the house uses, that's a start. You know, for me, I'm one part of the nation, and I can start the change right there in a diplomatic way, of course, with my family. But we have managed to reduce energy, electrical use 40% over 5 years, just by figuring out where the energy was being used and putting some insulation in and doing some things so we're less dependent on all the machines that, you know, drive are there to maintain our perfect comfort. And so there's that. And then I try to do things in the community. You know, at the public library, they weren't recycling in the cafeteria, or they had recycling bin, but it looked just like the trash bin. So I said, look, this is not working because people think the recycling bin is trash because it looks just like the trash bin. So we have to change the appearance of it and put it right next to the trash bin. So if they have something in their hand, they have a choice and they can put it in one or the other. And they went along with that, and they improved the situation, and now the recyclables are going into the recycling container, and the trash is going in the trash. So, you know, little changes like that. The Environmental Commission, for instance, made kilowatt meters, which are little meters you can plug into the wall, and then plug your computer into it and see how much energy the computer uses when it's on, when it's on standby, when you turn off the sound, you know, when your printer is on or off. You can check with this little kilowatt meter. And so we made 4 of those available at the public library for people to check out and experiment with in their homes to find out just what the consequences are if you turn this switch on or off. Are you saving energy? You know, is this something that, and it's an effort to empower the individual. You know, once you start trying to make a change, you find ways to do it. I tried to, a lot of people in town have noted that the Princeton University athletic lights were on at night and nobody was using the field.
Oh.
So I thought if I could, you know, get them to turn it off, I could that would be like a huge, like I could really, I could retire from the energy-saving business if I could get them to change that.
Did that happen?
Well, everything's complicated, you know, because, you know, they have to schedule these things and then somebody cancels and it's all kind of computer-driven, and who are they going to give permission to turn lights on and off? And so, but I got them, you know, working on it, and so hopefully they have a better system now. And just, you know, you can just do little things like that to kind of jumpstart, catalyze change in the community, and you know, find ways. You know, obviously riding a bike. I don't know. Realizing that a little bit of rain is not going to hurt you. You know, it's just water, and you know, just it's trying to decouple oneself from this dependence on all these machines that you know, it's a lot of little things eventually add up.
You mentioned the library. That's where you and I actually met, wasn't it? The Princeton Public Library, which I think is a wonderful place, just a wonderful place. A lot of, I run a program there called Talking Politics, books about political situation, and Steve turned up at one of my sessions, and when we talked, I realized, I said, you know, down the road I want to do a program on environment, and so we kept in touch. So that's how I first contacted Steve Hildner. Well, Steve, thank you so much for joining me today. You had so much to offer, and a lot of it's really very hopeful. And the idea that people can take initiative and can in some way have some impact on their society, on themselves, on their lives, is really, really important at this particular time. The next shows that I'll be doing down the road, I have several ideas. One may be a return of Congressman Rush Holt, who wants to talk about this subject but couldn't make it this particular time. I'm also looking at topics like affordable housing and getting some very interesting guests on that. Education, that's a big one. I want to have some discussion on education. So stay in touch with Backstory with Joan Goldstein, because social issues are my specialty. And I'm very, very interested in ways in which we can all work together to make this a very happy world. Thank you.